Prime Minister Julia Gillard. When they return at noon, debate on two competing proposals to fund the federal government for the rest of fiscal year 2011. Voting is set for 3 o'clock. And now live Senate coverage here on C-SPAN 2.
To the Senate.
Washington, D.C., March 9, 2011. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Kirsten E. Gillibrand, a senator from the state of New York, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Madam President.
The Majority Leader.
Following any leader remarks of the period of morning business until 10:40, the senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each. The majority will control the first half. The Republicans will control the final half. At 10:40, the Senate will recess for the joint meeting of Congress with the Honorable Julia Gillard, Prime Minister of Australia. The Senate will reconvene at 12 noon and proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 1, the Defense Appropriations Bill, which is the famous CR, H.R. 1, and the Democratic alternative. At 3 p.m., Senators should expect 2 roll call votes in relation then to those 2 matters. Under an agreement reached yesterday, each proposal will be subject to a 60-vote threshold. Madam President, on the news on the way to work this morning, I heard one Republican senator, part of the Republican leadership, say he thought all Republicans would vote for H.R. 1. This job-killing, that is what he said, that's what I said, this job-killing, short-sighted bill. He said they were going to do it because of the numbers involved in it. The numbers involved in it. Well, Madam President, I tell everyone, my friends on the Republican side, the American people are not as concerned about the numbers as what's in this bill with those mean-spirited writers. We're concerned about the numbers. The American people are concerned about numbers. The President of the United States, the Democratic senators have agreed to address the numbers, and we'll do that. We've done it in our alternative here today. But this is not a bill about numbers. H.R. 1 is a mean-spirited bill that will cut the heart out of the recovery we have in America today. It goes after little children, poor little boys and girls who want to learn to, they don't know what they want, but we want them to learn to read, to be able to learn something. Head Start is a program that has been successful. We have a lot of poor people in Nevada. I wish we didn't, but we do. Head Start has been something that has been great for our community. National Institutes of Health, they're whacking that. National Science Foundation, our clean energy jobs, they're going after that. National laboratories. Where is the spirit of Pete Domenici? Pete Domenici, longtime Republican senator. He and I work as chair and ranking member of the Energy and Water Subcommittee on Appropriations, trying to fund those very important labs. The labs do lots of good things. They among other things, they make our country nuclear weapons safe and reliable. What has been done with this meat axe approach that they say is only numbers is not good for our country. I've heard my friend, the Assistant Majority Leader, talk about what has happened to one of the smaller laboratories, one of the smaller ones, Argonne in Illinois. We have big ones at Livermore, at Sandia, Los Alamos, and other labs around the country that are some of the places where there is pure science. One of the few places in America today that we have pure science. What this H.R. 1 has done, what they're trying to do to education in our country, not only Head Start, but how it affects education generally. What this bill would do if it would pass H.R. 1, it's not numbers. It's not numbers only. What does it do to our port security? There's presiding officers from the state of New York. Every day there are evil people trying to do damage to the people of the state of New York in the ports. Our airport security. It's not, we still have to look out for these bad people, the shoe bombers and other people come up with all these very bad ways to try to harm America. So for someone over here on the other side to say they're looking at H.R. 1 and they'll all vote for it probably because of the numbers, how insulting to the American people.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 10:40 a.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first half and the Republicans controlling the final half.
Madam President,
Senator from Illinois.
I ask consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
And I ask consent that President Pro Tem the Senate be authorized to appoint a committee on the part of the Senate to join with the like committee on the part of the House of Representatives to escort the Honorable Julia Gillard, Prime Minister of Australia, into the House chamber for the joint meeting.
Without objection.
Madam President, I want to follow on what was said by the Majority Leader. This exercise that we're engaged in here, this conversation about how to finish this year, this fiscal year, which ends on October 1st, is one that I think has gotten out of hand. And I'll tell you why. I know the debt is a serious problem facing America. I know the deficit is something that threatens our economy and our way of living. I also know that there are sensible, thoughtful ways to deal with it. And one of them was addressed by the Bowles-Simpson Deficit Commission, which I served on and voted for in terms of their final report. I disagreed with some particulars, but that's the nature of a compromise and the nature of moving our nation forward. But what we tried to do in that commission was to take a look at this challenge and not solve it in a month or 6 months, but say, how can we solve this, do it in a sensible, responsible way, and still grow the economy? A few feet away from where we're meeting right now are some of the best minds in America, sitting in a room meeting with senators. They represent the high-tech industries of America. And I just heard Mr. John Chambers, who is the CEO of Fiscal, talk about the challenge we face and compare our status in the world to China today, the #2 economy in the world. And he compared our situation today to what it was just a few years ago. We are now in a position where we have 1 out of 4 startup companies that we had just a few years ago. And it's an indication to me that if America is going to continue to lead in this world, we need to invest in the things that make us strong. I'm not saying the deficit is not a problem. It is. But we will still have a federal budget as we address the deficit, and we should invest in that federal budget in things that are important, things that build our future. Senator Reid of Nevada this morning talked about the vulnerable in America. Well, I couldn't agree more. You don't hear the word safety net around here anymore. And it's unfortunate because we know that even in this prosperous society, there are many unfortunate people. There are children who, through no fault of their own, were born into dysfunctional and poor families. Kids whom we try to rescue from their plight and engage them in Head Start, bring them into a learning atmosphere, a classroom. I've been there all over my state of Illinois. I was just there 2 weeks ago in Chicago. I went into one of the poorest sections of that great city and saw a room full of 40 of the cutest kids in the world from struggling families who were lucky enough to be in a Head Start program. And it means that for the better part of the day, they are in a safe, positive learning environment. Is that a good thing? Of course it is. Whether it's my son or daughter or your son or daughter, it really comes down to the basics. If we don't give our children the right liftoff in their lives, many of them struggle and, unfortunately, many fail. So when the House Republicans say that the way to deal with our deficit is to cut hundreds of thousands of these poor children out of the Head Start program, to dismiss tens of thousands of teachers and staff, you have to step back and say, are you sure? Has it reached that point? Are we at a point now where we have to deny these children access to the kind of learning experience that makes their school experience later on more successful? I don't think so. An honest look at our deficit would not just go after education and research and investment in our infrastructure. It would look across the board, as the Bowles-Simpson Commission did. How can we rationalize at this moment in time cutting Head Start for hundreds of thousands of kids across America, denying money to the poorest school districts in America where they literally struggle day to day to try to turn the lives around of children who are in very dire circumstances. To cut, as the House Republicans suggested, Pell Grants. Pell Grants. Those are the grants given to college students from lower-income families. I look back at my life, and I guess, Madam President, I was one of those kids. You know, my mother was a widow, and I wanted to go to college, and it wasn't a family experience, and I needed help. In those days, Pell Grants didn't exist, but college loans did, and the federal college loan came to my rescue. Well, here I stand today because of that. And for hundreds and thousands of students across America, the Pell Grants are really their ticket to college. That's how they can get into college, earn a diploma, and succeed in life. And when the House Republicans say we've reached the point where we have to cut that assistance to college students across America, you say to yourself, is it that bad that we have to reach that far? Let me suggest there are other things we ought to look at first. I happen to believe in this great, prosperous nation that the most prosperous among us, the wealthiest, the people who have benefited the most from this great nation, they can be asked to sacrifice more. And I think they should. Asking those at the highest income levels in America to pay more in taxes at this point in our history is not unreasonable and is not going to kill the economy and is just simple economic justice. If doing that means we can protect the most vulnerable and protect opportunity for education, I think that's fair. I also question some of the things we're doing. Look at the price of gasoline at gas stations across America today, and then watch the next quarterly earnings report of the oil companies and tell me why we continue to funnel billions of taxpayers' dollars into subsidies for the oil companies. They're doing quite well, thank you. They don't need a subsidy that adds to our deficit. The same thing is true in my home state of Illinois. Let me just get real personal about this. I happen to believe that agriculture is critical to our nation. I believe that we need to be there as a safety net for farmers who can't predict what the weather will be or crop prices might be. But there are parts of our ag program that frankly need to be seriously reviewed, and the federal contribution needs to be reduced. At a time when commodity prices are the highest and farms are the most prosperous and profitable, the fact that we are sending so much money out of the Treasury to some of the largest farms in America is just indefensible. So I'm bringing it home to the agriculture state of Illinois, to our entire nation when it comes to oil and gas, and saying before we cut the money for research, as the House Republicans suggest, at the National Institutes of Health, before we deny to doctors and scientists and the best minds in America the resources they need to find cures for diseases, to find the next wonder drug that will revolutionize life in America, before we do that, let's take an honest look at this entire budget. The House Republican budget goes too far. And let me also raise a point relative to my own Appropriations Subcommittee. We have funded 3 watchdog agencies to make sure that we never, ever enter another recession like the one we're in now. After Wall Street brought the economy to its knees, sent millions of hardworking Americans to the unemployment line, and took $700 billion from taxpayers, you'll remember that, $700 billion in bailout funds, the House Republicans are now fighting to prevent the cops on the beat who are going to be there to ensure that Wall Street can never wreak this damage again. The Securities and Exchange Commission was tasked by our Wall Street Reform Bill to write new rules to bring more transparency to stock markets. Now, the House Republican budget would cut $231 million from the Securities and Exchange Commission over what was authorized. That's an 18% cut at the very moment this agency should be beefing up its ranks to keep an eye on what's happening on Wall Street and writing the new rules for enforcement. That may be good news for future Bernie Madoffs. It is not good news for investors and families across America who count on Wall Street and financial institutions across America to deal honestly. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission was tasked by the same Wall Street bill to bring sunshine to what Warren Buffett once called, quote, financial weapons of mass destruction, close quote, the credit default swaps and other derivatives traded in shadowy over-the-counter markets. the House Republican budget would cut $174 million from that agency, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, compared to what we recommend in the Senate. A 69% cut at the very moment when the CFTC needs better technology and more investigators to handle its awesome responsibilities. And then there's the third hit in the House Republican budget. They go after the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It's brand new, created by the Wall Street Reform Bill. That budget that the House Republicans are pushing would cap funding for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau at half of what it would otherwise receive. Since the day that I first introduced the bill to create this bureau, in a different form but very similar goal, with Elizabeth Warren's help, a professor from Harvard Law School, the House Republicans have fought this idea. When President Obama signed it into law, the reformers, the people who want Americans to have access to financial services that they understand and can use to improve their lives, well, we won that day. As the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee with responsibility for funding these agencies, I've done my best to make sure they have the adequate funds to protect American investors and to maintain the sterling reputation of our financial institutions in Wall Street. I will tell you that as an early champion of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, I'm going to continue that fight to make sure that this agency has the power and the resources that it needs. Madam President, I would close by saying this. There is such a stark contrast in the vote that we'll have today. We're going to be asked on the floor whether or not members of the Senate want to vote for H.R. 1, the House Republican budget. The Senate Majority Leader has reminded us it is not just a spending bill. It is a bill that is freighted with every bumper sticker issue you can remember over the last 10 years. The House Republicans didn't just want to cut spending. They wanted to inject themselves in the national debate on a myriad of issues. They want to take the spending bill and debate abortion. They want to take this spending bill and debate whether or not we will provide any federal funds for family planning or any funds for Planned Parenthood across America. They want to take this spending bill and take the funding away from National Public Radio and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They want to take this spending bill and they want to take 1/3 of the resources from the Environmental Protection Agency that they need to make sure that the air we breathe and the water we drink are fit for ourselves and the family. That's what they're doing. And you think to yourself, if this is about an economic emergency and a budget emergency, why did the House Republicans let it devolve into this situation where it's just become a catfight over political issues? We can do better. The American people expect us to do better. I'm still meeting with a group of 5 other senators, 3 Republicans and 2 other Democrats. We are trying on a bipartisan basis to take the Bowles-Simpson Commission and build this into a thoughtful effort that will reduce our deficit in a meaningful way. It will take time. We're not going to finish it in 6 or 7 months. We're not going to finish it lurching 2 weeks at a time in funding this federal government. We need to address our responsibilities here. The responsibility to build this economy, number 1, and number 2, to put America's fiscal house in order. We can do that, but we need to get beyond the current level of political fighting into a more constructive level. I hope that this bipartisan group that I'm part of will be part of the solution, ultimately. In the meantime, we will continue our efforts. Madam President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President.
Senator from Washington.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Madam President, our nation's budget is a statement of our values, our priorities, and our vision for what kind of country we will be handing off to our children and our grandchildren. Working together to pass a responsible and forward-looking budget that works for the American people is one of the most important jobs we have here in the United States Senate. The outcome of this process that we're talking about is going to affect millions of families across our country. And the decisions that we make right here this week are going to go a long ways towards determining if our economy is going to continue moving in the right direction. So this morning I want to speak about two very different budgets being debated here today, with two very different statements about what we should be focused on as a country and two very different visions for how we need to be positioned to compete successfully and win the future. Madam President, this shouldn't be a partisan process, and I'm still hopeful that we can work together on a budget plan that cuts spending responsibly and works for the American people. But I am extremely disappointed that Republicans who came into office talking about the economy have proposed an extreme budget that would destroy hundreds of thousands of jobs, devastate workers and small businesses across the country, and threaten that fragile economic recovery. I am disappointed that at a time when so many middle-class families still need some support to get back on their feet after the Wall Street crisis, Republicans have proposed a highly politicized slash-and-burn budget that will pull the rug out from families and children. And I'm disappointed that while the Senate Democratic proposal makes responsible and practical budget cuts that will allow us to continue out-innovating, out-educating, and out-building our competitors, Republicans are proposing a budget that would hack away at investments across the board and really threaten our nation's ability to compete now and into the future. Madam President, we're going to hear a lot about big numbers here today, and I'm probably going to mention some myself. But I think it's important that we keep in mind that this debate really is about more than dollars and cents. It's about real people with real lives. I recently heard from the South Central Workforce Development Council in my home state of Washington. They told me about a man they worked with by the name of Damon. Damon had been laid off from his job testing machine equipment. He'd held that job for almost 10 years. He and his wife had to move back in with his father, and he said no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find work that matched his skills. So Damon had to do something about it. He went to his local one-stop career center. He sat down with counselors who talked him through what local employers were looking for, and he decided that he was going to learn computer networking. He studied very hard, and he graduated from a local computer technology program. And despite this tough economy, he was able to work with the One-Stop Center to find a new job in a new field. Damon was able to get back on his feet and support his family because of this program. And he's not alone. Millions of Americans depend on workforce training programs to get the skills they need to get back to work and help our economy grow, including 400,000 in my home state. But House Republicans have proposed eliminating these critical programs and cutting off services for workers who depend on them. At a time when so many workers are fighting to get back on the job, this would be devastating. I also recently met with a woman named Tiffany. She's from Chehalis, Washington. She told me that her stepson Rodney had some real difficult family circumstances and had fallen behind his peers, and that she and her husband couldn't afford private education they thought he needed to catch up. She heard about Head Start from a friend, and she enrolled her son Rodney in that program. Tiffany told me she saw the difference in a few months, and just a short time later, Rodney was ready for kindergartner and is now the top reader in his first grade class. Tiffany and her family got the support they needed, and they too are far from being alone. Nearly 1 million families and their children depend on Head Start. But the Republican proposal we will be voting on this afternoon eliminates services for 218,000 children, including more than 3,000 in my home state. It will close 16,000 classrooms across the country and cause up to 55,000 teachers and staff to lose their jobs. This extreme slash-and-burn approach is wrong. It would hurt the most vulnerable of our children and families in our country and leave us at a competitive disadvantage in the future. The Republican proposal also slashes community development block grants by 62%. That will eliminate services and decimate housing and economic development programs in communities across our country. It guts the community health centers that so many Americans depend on for their health care, eliminating funding outright for 127 clinics in 38 of our states, reducing services at over 1,000 centers nationwide, and cutting off health care for almost 3 million Americans. That will cause 5,000 workers across our country to lose their jobs. But, Madam President, not only will the Republican proposal devastate middle-class families across the country, it would also halt the beginnings of an economic recovery that our families and our small business owners desperately need to take root. Last month, our economy added over 200,000 private sector jobs, and the unemployment rate fell to the lowest level in 2 years. We have a long way to go, but I'm confident that we have turned the corner and we're beginning to move in the right direction. Economists on both the left and the right have come out and said that if the Republican proposal from the House were to pass, the economic recovery and millions of jobs across the country would be threatened. In fact, one independent analysis said the Republicans' plan could destroy up to 700,000 American jobs in this country, including 15,000 in my home state of Washington. That would be devastating, and we cannot afford to let that happen. That's why, Madam President, the Senate Democratic proposal would take our country in a very different direction. It would cut spending, billions of dollars, in fact, but it would do so in a responsible and practical way that will protect our middle-class families who need it most. And, Madam President, our proposal continues to make the investments we need as a country to compete and win in the 21st century economy. Take the highly successful Tiger program that I helped create. Communities across our country have been competing very hard for the resources from this program so they can invest in transportation projects that make significant contributions to the nation, to their region, or their metropolitan area. The Tiger program is today putting workers on the job, and it's helping to lay down a strong foundation for economic growth in this country. But the Republican proposal would not only eliminate that program completely and slam the door on communities that want to invest in their infrastructure, it would also take back every penny of funding already promised in last year's budget. That will halt 75 projects in 40 of our states that are ready to go and put 33,000 jobs at risk. It doesn't make any sense. Madam President, the Democratic proposal would protect that critical investment. The Republican proposal would also jeopardize public health and the environment by gutting the laws that keep our air and water clean. It cuts nearly $2 billion in funding for clean water infrastructure, which our local communities need to keep our families safe. So when you turn on that water in your kitchen, you know it's safe. It slashes the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which, by the way, uses some of the most treasured places in our country. But that's not all. The extreme Republican proposal would also slash investments for our students and our children, including a $700 million cut to Title I funding, which will affect 2,400 schools serving over 1 million students. And it cuts Pell Grants by 15%, which will make it so much harder for our kids to go to college today, right now, when they're struggling. The House Republican proposal would even slash some of the bipartisan programs we've created to keep our families safe, including 66% cuts to both the Transit Security Grant Program that helps make sure that our trains and subways are safe, as well as the Port Security Grant Program that helps protect our critical economic and national security assets across the country. That doesn't make any sense. If a terrorist attack were to occur at one of our ports or our transit systems, it would be absolutely devastating for our families and our economy, which is why the Democratic proposal protects these critical investments. Madam President, I ask for one additional minute.
Without objection.
Madam President, those are just a few of the examples of the radical and irresponsible cuts that are proposed in the Republican budget. We, of course, need to cut spending. We need to bring down the deficit. We all agree on that. But we've got to do it responsibly. And we cannot do it on the backs of our middle-class families who are struggling. Madam President, I urge my colleagues this afternoon to support the Democratic proposal And if we can't pass something today, I urge my Republican colleagues to come to the table, work with us to pass a responsible, long-term budget that really does reflect our priorities and gets our workers back on jobs and invests in American future. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
The Republican leader.
Later today, senators will have an opportunity to take a position on government spending. At a time when Washington is borrowing about $4 billion a day, Democratic leaders want to cut about $4.5 billion in government spending for the rest of this fiscal year and call it a day. In other words, they want to take what amounts to a day-and-a-half-long holiday from their out-of-control spending and then return to the status quo for the rest of the year. Let me just add that paying lip service to the threat caused by the deficit is not a substitute for responsible leadership. And the job-destroying tax hikes on small businesses and American families are not the answer to out-of-control Washington spending. At a time when increasing gas prices are already threatening our economic recovery, a minivan tax that some on the other side have proposed won't solve our nation's fiscal crisis. But I'll tell you what it will do. It will destroy jobs and impose a real burden on families every time they fill up at the pump, at a time when people are looking for relief instead. Democrats' steadfast refusal to cut another dime from the bloated Washington budget has left them no choice but to propose raising taxes on American families and small businesses so they can continue spending at unsustainable levels. Republicans, on the other hand, have made a serious proposal to rein in wasteful spending. To me, at least, the choice before us is pretty clear. But as we approach today's vote, it's worth noting that even if we were to pass the biggest spending cuts that have been proposed so far in this debate, it wouldn't even put a dent in the fiscal problems we face as a result of the growth in entitlement spending. Think about it. Democrats have been waging war this week over a proposal to cut $4.7 billion. Meanwhile, the amount of money we promised to spend on programs like Social Security and Medicare, money we don't have, is about $52 trillion. So this week's debate is just a dress rehearsal for the big stuff. And so far, Democrats are showing they're just not up to it. They either lack the stomach or the courage. And the President, as members of his own party point out, is nowhere to be found on this issue. Now, I've talked about this leadership vacuum repeatedly this week on the entitlements and how their unchecked growth threatens to bury all of us in red ink before we know it. We can argue about whether to cut $5 billion or $60 billion in day-to-day expenses all we want, but the fact is, even if we hit the bigger number, we're still staring at a catastrophe. And the President appears to be totally uninterested in leading us to a bipartisan solution, the way Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton did the last time we faced crises of this magnitude. But when it comes to another crisis, the jobs crisis, the President isn't just failing to lead, he's flat out barring the door with a mountain of stifling new regulations and calculated inaction on outstanding free trade agreements with Colombia and Panama. This morning, the U.S. Trade Representative is set to testify before the Finance Committee to voice the administration's support of a trade agreement with South Korea. And while we support the administration's position on South Korea, the lack of leadership on these two other countries which signed free trade agreements with us more than 3 years ago is completely disheartening. The reason for inaction is stunning. Union bosses don't want to see them passed. For some reason, they seem to think that expanding the market for U.S. goods into Colombia and Panama somehow hurts them, which is absurd, absolutely absurd, Madam President. The administration has previously expressed tepid support for these deals, an acknowledgment that expanding markets for U.S. goods can only help U.S. workers, and that the picture in Colombia is better than the labor bosses would have us believe. But they've failed to follow through. The irony of union opposition to these trade deals is that an expanded U.S. presence in Latin America can only help the workers there by exporting U.S. business standards and practices. And, of course, more exports for U.S. firms mean more jobs for U.S. workers in the United States. In the last few weeks, company after company has come before Congress to testify how important accessing Latin American markets is for the future and to create jobs right here in America. According to the Chamber of Commerce, failing to pass these trade agreements, along with the trade agreement with South Korea, could cost us 380,000 U.S. jobs. While we've dithered on these agreements, Colombia has moved on. Having been stiff-armed by the United States, it's finding other trade partners. Naturally, Colombia has turned to other countries, and worse still, is warming relations with Hugo Chavez in neighboring Venezuela. Last week, Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos was quoted referring to Chavez as his new best friend, a man who just last year accused Santos of plotting to assassinate him. At a time when nearly 14 million Americans are looking for work, the President should be listening to those of us who come to him with ways to create jobs, and this is one of them. The administration has no excuse for failing to act on these trade agreements. It's in the interest of our country to approve them. It would create jobs here at home at a time when we desperately need them. I am confident Congress could pass these on a bipartisan basis today. I urge the administration to act today, and not just on South Korea, but on Colombia and Panama. I, for one, am prepared to do everything in my power to pass these agreements, all of them together, this year. Madam President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President.
Senator from Nebraska.
Madam President, I ask that the quorum call be set aside.
Without objection.
Madam President, I rise today to talk about the administration's really ill-advised cap-and-trade agenda and to support a bipartisan bill that I've co-sponsored to stop it. The Energy Tax Prevention Act would stop the EPA from going around Congress and using regulations to implement the administration's failed cap-and-trade agenda. The bill is necessary because the administration is marching ahead with its cap-and-trade agenda, even though the American people clearly want to focus on job creation, not policies that destroy jobs. For evidence that the administration is marching ahead, one need only look at the President's budget. It clearly states, and I'm quoting, continues to support greenhouse gas emission reductions in the United States in the range of 17% below 2005 levels by 2020 and 83% by 2050, unquote. Well, not surprisingly, Madam President, these reductions are nearly identical to those proposed in the Waxman-Markey House cap-and-trade bill. Americans rejected that legislation because it would have increased taxes on everyone. Anyone who turns on a light switch, buys American-made products, fills up their gas tank. The Energy Tax Prevention Act would prevent the administration from using its regulatory powers to circumvent Congress and implement this energy tax that Americans rejected last year. It's about protecting jobs, manufacturing jobs, for example, and it puts Congress back in the driver's seat, in charge of energy policy, taking it back from unelected bureaucrats at the too often overreaching EPA. Above all, this bill rejects the notion that placing additional energy tax burdens on Americans is good policy. As the price of oil climbs and gas prices follow, our bill says, don't hit Americans with another tax. And make no mistake, cap-and-trade policies will drive up the cost of everything, transportation fuels and electricity leading the way. Nobody disagrees with this understanding. In fact, the central policy mechanism of all of these proposals is making the use and production of fossil fuels more expensive. Well, the Congressional Budget Office has weighed in on this, and they put it this way, quote, a cap-and-trade program would thus lead to price increases for energy and energy-intensive goods and services. Such price increases would stem from the restriction on emissions. Indeed, the price increases would be essential to the success of the cap-and-trade program, unquote. In other words, these efforts are designed to make oil and gas and coal-fired electricity more expensive, and the same is true for the EPA's regulatory plan. So gas prices will go up, electricity will go up, farm input costs will go up, and consumers will pay more. And U.S. manufacturing will get crushed under the heavy hand of the EPA. Meanwhile, our overseas competitors, unfettered by the cap, will gobble up market share and hurt those providing good-paying jobs in this country. And our farmers and ranchers won't be spared either. The cost of running pivot irrigation will go up. Nebraska has thousands of them. Diesel fuel for tractors and combines will go up. The price tag on fertilizer that farmers need to grow crops will skyrocket. Now, some of my constituents might be saying, well, I'm not a farmer, I'm not a manufacturer, so I'm not affected. But unfortunately, no American can escape this reach of this ill-advised regulatory effort, because refineries are first targeted in EPA's regulatory schedule. Because electrical plants are first targeted, electrical bills and the cost of fuel will go up. If you think gas prices are high now, brace yourself. More price hikes are coming. And if you think your electrical bill at the end of the month is already plenty high, look out for the EPA's energy tax. And believe it or not, the Obama administration has made it clear that these higher prices are precisely what the doctor ordered. During the presidential campaign, President Obama famously said, he was really upfront, quote, under my plan, electricity bills would necessarily skyrocket, unquote. Citizens probably entered the voting booth with the false hope that we in Congress would never let that happen. But sadly, the Obama administration has made it clear that they intend to work around Congress. Energy Secretary Stephen Chu even told the Wall Street Journal in September of '08, quote, somehow we have to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to the levels of Europe, unquote. No, that's not my vision for America. And with gasoline over $7 per gallon in places like Germany and France, I doubt that many Americans share that vision. Yet this administration has chosen to use the EPA to make gasoline expensive through its ill-advised energy tax plan. The EPA is literally targeting our fuel refineries when gas prices are headed to $4 per gallon and oil is over $100 a barrel. It doesn't make sense. But when we thought we saw a ray of hope, when the President said he wanted to slow down the regulatory freight train bearing down on the nation's job creators, well, something happened. He said he wanted to reduce the regulatory burdens on small businesses. He even went so far as to put out an executive order in January, and he instructed the agencies to review, quote, rules that have gotten out of balance, placing unreasonable burdens on business, burdens that have stifled innovation and have a chilling effect on growth and jobs, unquote. Well, unfortunately, the EPA apparently believes their greenhouse gas regulations are more important than job creation. The headline from the Hill newspaper says it all. Quote, EPA confident Obama reg policy won't affect new climate rules, unquote. Well, the EPA, all-powerful, quickly dismissed the executive order, saying Quote, EPA is confident that our recent and upcoming steps to address GHG emissions under the Clean Air Act comfortably pass muster under the sensible standards the President laid out, unquote. In other words, the EPA believes and continue to think that their regulatory cap-and-trade plan is not an unreasonable burden on consumers, small business, and job creators. You'd have to suspend all rational thought to reach that conclusion. It's unbelievable. Here's the kicker. These EPA regulations will have no discernible impact on global temperatures. Put simply, the EPA's agenda is all about more pain and no gain, because the rules and regulations here in the U.S. don't control places like China, India, Brazil, obviously. You see, global warming is called global warming for a reason. Yet it's our farmers, our ranchers, our small businesses that will be saddled with the job-killing costs. American job creators will have one arm tied behind their back trying to compete. Even EPA Administrator Jackson admitted that the House cap-and-trade bill would really have negligible impact on global temperatures. This is all unbelievably bad for America. It's no wonder that the Senate roundly repudiated the idea last year, and yet the EPA charges forward. We must restore some measure of common sense. This bill is the right step, and I urge my colleagues to support it. I yield the floor, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I come to the floor, as I do every week, as a physician who's practiced medicine and taken care of families in Wyoming for a quarter of a century, to give a doctor's second opinion of the health care law. And county commissioners from around the state of Wyoming are coming to town today for their annual meeting. It was 1 year ago today at that annual meeting that Nancy Pelosi, then the Speaker of the House, addressed that group and said, we have to pass the bill so you can find out what's in it. That quote has been replaced and repeated again and again and again, and people now know what is in this health care law. People have found out, and every month since this law has been passed, people have found out an additional thing about the health care law that they absolutely do not like. So now that the American people know what's in the bill, and they know that they don't like it, let's get to the fundamentals of what the American people have asked for. When they asked for change in health care in this country, they said they wanted the care that they need from the doctor that they want at a price they can afford. Well, the new law fails that test, and it fails miserably. It has only taken a year to break almost every promise that the President made when he addressed our Congress and we addressed the country. So what I'd like to do is take a look month by month at how those promises were broken. And since it is now March, and it started in March with her statement, in March of 2010, 1 year ago, the Congressional Budget Office evaluated the law to see how much it actually would cost. They told us that the law could only reduce the deficit if it did something about the long-term insolvency of Medicare. Instead, the Democrats and the President proposed and adopted and signed into law cuts of over $500 billion from Medicare. Not to save Medicare, but to start a whole new government entitlement program. A decision that the CBO said would increase the deficit by $260 billion. Well, let's go to April. In April, we learned that the cost for those Medicare cuts go way beyond dollars and cents. An analysis by the Department of Health and Human Services found that these cuts could drive up to 15% of hospitals out of business. For this administration, the shortages of hospitals apparently takes a back seat to the shortage of Washington bureaucrats. Now let's go to May. In May, we learned that over 200,000 Americans with pre-existing conditions and expensive health insurance would not be eligible to enroll in the new high-risk pools created in the health care law. That is, of course, unless they were willing to completely drop the insurance that they had and wait without insurance for 6 months. Then they would qualify for what was in the health care law. For many people with pre-existing conditions who were paying higher premiums, they felt that that would be irresponsible behavior, risky, put them at financial risk, but that's what this administration and this government was proposing. Well, in June, after the administration sent over 4 million postcards to small businesses, you remember the postcards, the ones claiming that those small businesses would be eligible for a tax credit? Well, the Associated Press blew the whistle. It turned out that the only small businesses that were eligible, fully eligible for these tax credits implied fewer than 25 people. So to be eligible at all, they had to have fewer than 25 people. But moreover, the Associated Press reported that the tax credit drops off sharply if the company employed any more than 10 people, or if the annual salary was averaging more than $25,000. So if you had 10 employees and paid them on average $25,000, you could get the tax credit. But once you went to that 11th employee and gave someone a raise, you started to lose the thing that the administration said was so valuable. That was in June. In July, the Obama administration's own Justice Department confirmed the individual mandate penalty is a tax increase. Well, when ABC News' George Stephanopoulos asked the president if the mandate penalty was a tax increase, this is what the president said, quote, "I absolutely reject that notion." Well, if the president absolutely rejects the notion, why is his own Justice Department contradicting him? In August, without so much as a hearing before Congress, the president made a recess appointment. He tapped Dr. Donald Berwick to run the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So how big is this federal agency? Well, it includes oversight on a budget larger than the Pentagon's. Dr. Berwick believes the government must ration health care, and that the only issue is whether we ration with our eyes wide open, as he said. Well, the president promised not to ration care. So why did he make an appointment of someone who believes it's inevitable to ration care and do it in a way without ever allowing the Senate, Republicans and Democrats alike, members of this body, to even have a hearing so that this individual could explain his position, explain his previous comments, explain what he said and written? The president refused and did a recess appointment on someone who never testified, never came to a confirmation hearing, and he put him in charge of a program with a budget larger than the Pentagon's. I mean, can you imagine if a Secretary of Defense was made a recess appointment without a congressional hearing? It's unthinkable. In September, the administration released new rules estimating that 80% of the small businesses would be forced to change the coverage of insurance that they offer to their employees. Madam President, these aren't my numbers. These are the administration's own numbers. But it was the president who said over and over again that if you like the coverage you have today, then you can keep it. Now we know that was another one of the president's empty promises. Well, in October, responding to complaints from unions and corporations, the Obama administration began handing out waivers, waivers that excuse individual groups from Obamacare's expensive mandates. These waivers went mostly to those politically connected to this administration. Now, most American families still have to bear the law's expensive burdens. Clearly, for this administration, playing favorites is more important than achieving fairness. I think every American ought to be able to get a waiver from this health care law. In November, a majority of the American people voiced their opposition to this law and handed an election response that resulted in a significant change in the composition of the House and the Senate because the American people knew they did not want this health care law. Well, the American people were concerned that they even wondered if this law was constitutional. And in December, a federal judge in Virginia ruled that it was unconstitutional to force Americans to buy a product. The Service Employees International Union, one of the biggest unions in the country, also admitted in December that fulfilling the requirements of Obamacare would be financially impossible. This is the same law that they said the country needed when they lobbied in favor of it. In January of this year, the Medicare actuary called the administration's claim that the health care law would bring down costs, quote, false more than true, close quote. Also, a federal judge in Florida struck down the entire law as unconstitutional. And then in February, last month, we learned that the IRS, when they submitted their 2012 budget to Congress, that IRS budget specifically mentions the health care law 250 times. They mention it as a source of authority and funding for new powers. They called the health care law, quote, the largest set of tax law changes in more than 20 years. To begin implementing these changes will require thousands of new Washington bureaucrats. Well, that was through February. Now here we are, March 9th. Did anything happen in March that the American people now found out about the law? Absolutely. Last Friday night, the Secretary of Health and Human Services granted another 150 waivers. Another 150 waivers. Now there are over 1,040 waivers covering 2.6 million individuals. These are people who don't want to live under the Obama health care law. They don't want it to apply to them, and I think every American ought to have that right to that same waiver. Well, of those 2.6 million who have received waivers, Madam President, 1.2 million are members of unions. So that's 46% of the waivers have been given to union members. Now, the website where you go to for that information, of course, the Secretary has tried to disguise how they label these individuals, and union plans are now called multi-employer plans. Oh, and under this change of the name, the website where you have to go to learn this is called Promoting Transparency. So we have an administration says one thing, does another. The American people now know what is in the law. As they were studying the law before the vote, they didn't want it. Now they know, and they still don't want it. It is clear that it is unsustainable, unaffordable, and unconstitutional. It is time to repeal and replace it. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Missouri.
Thank you for letting me have the floor for a few minutes. First of all, Madam President, I'd like to say that Dr. Barrasso's second opinion is clearly the opinion of Missourians, and I think when you ask Americans if they want to see changes in the health care system, but not these changes, they say, yes, we want the health care system to be changed. We just don't want it changed this way. I'd remind the chair that in Missouri, in the primary election in August last year, 72% of the people who voted said they didn't want to be part of this health care plan. This is going to be a big discussion and a big issue for the next couple of years until we decide what direction we're going to take. Today I want to talk about spending. These two bills are going to come to the floor today about spending, and there'll be lots of discussions about the cuts that the House made, the $61 billion of cuts, and how this cut could have been better, how this is a good thing for the government or for somebody to do. And, of course, I suspect that most all of that will be true. What's unfortunate is that we don't get to talk about on the Senate floor today what we might cut instead of these things will be discussed that people think are such a good idea for us to continue. The truth is we have to make the kinds of decisions that get spending under control. This year we're going to spend about $3.8 trillion. We're going to collect about $2.2 trillion. And even though $1 trillion is too big a concept to wrap your mind around, everybody understands that 3.8 is a lot bigger than 2.2. If your business was spending $3.8 million and bringing in $2.2 million, you'd understand that your business wasn't going to be in business very much longer. If your family was spending $38,000 and bringing in the door $22,000, you'd know that that couldn't continue. And this can't continue either. And the idea that we can't make $61 billion of reductions in spending in a $3.8 trillion budget, $1.6 trillion of which is deficit spending, just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to the American people. And we're going to have a government that can make choices. Right now we've got government trying to do the same thing over and over again at all three levels. And some of those things that government's trying to do at the federal, the state, and the local level ought to be left to families when they could be left to families. And other things are the legitimate job of government. But everything is not the legitimate job of the federal government. And almost nothing is the legitimate job of all levels of government. We'd be much better off if we'd try to go through this process. Okay, is this a problem that only government can solve? And if the answer is yes, then the next question is, well, can't we solve that problem closer to where people live and work and where the problem is, where families are? Can't we solve that at the city level or the county level? And, well, maybe the answer is no. And then the question should be, well, can't we solve it at the state level? And then the question should be, well, if we're going to solve it at the federal level, is there really a constitutional definition that allows us to do that? And there are some things that only the federal government can do, but there aren't very many things that only the federal government can do. We're going to hear in this discussion today and in the coming weeks about lots of good things that can be done in our society. We're going to hear about some things that I've worked to authorize and try to get us to make a priority and would still hope they could be a priority. Some of those programs are actually cut in the House appropriation bill that I'll vote for today, because my view is that we have to cut spending. And if we could cut the $61 billion this year, that exactly what I wanted to cut, that would be better for me. But I am committed to cut spending in any bill that we can get enough people to put a bill on the President's desk that will say, let's head toward a balanced budget. Let's get a balanced budget amendment. Let's head toward a balanced budget. But let's ask the right questions. You know, before I came to the Congress, I was a university president for 4 years. It was a private university, Southwest Baptist University in Bolivar, Missouri. We didn't take any federal money or any state money. We had to pay our bills. And because we had to pay our bills, as the president of the university, I was constantly being asked to do things that were good things to do, but I had several different categories of no, this is why we can't do that. And maybe the two that we ought to use the most often in Washington, D.C. these days is no, that's a good idea, but it's not what we do. I said that a lot as a university president. Matter of fact, in the 4 years I was there, I never had anybody come to me and ask me to do anything evil. I never had anybody come to me as president of Southwest Baptist University and say, here's something really bad that I think we should do as an institution. Every idea that I got was a good idea, but it wasn't always something we could do. So one of my categories of no is, no, that's a good idea, but that's not what we do. And we're going to hear lots of things about people with challenges that somebody should help, but the federal government is $1.6 trillion in debt this year. This year, not the $14 trillion of accumulated debt, 1.6 this year. Over $200 billion last month. Last month's deficit was within striking range of the annual deficit for the 10 years that ended in 2008. We are now spending more in deficit spending in a month than for a decade we spent in a year. If you average out that 10 years, it's very close to the February. And by the way, February is the shortest month. That's the only month where we have 28 days of spending, and we set a record on monthly deficit spending for the United States of America that was almost equal to the average annual deficit of the previous 10 years. And sometimes people come to me and they'd say, well, they'd have a really good idea that actually was something the university could do. And often then I'd have to say, well, that's a good idea. We ought to think about how we could do that, but you're going to have to help me figure out what we can stop doing so we can start doing this. This may, in fact, be a better thing than some of the things we're doing now, but we just can't do everything. You know, families deal with this issue all the time. You just can't do everything, even if it would be good to see those things done. And the federal government is doing the wrong thing when it heads down a road where you're spending so much more than you're collecting. Now, one obvious answer is, well, let's just collect more. And I suppose if you went to the Congressional Budget Office and said, what would the collection amount be for the federal government if the tax rate was 100%? Since they don't do any dynamic storing over there, they score as if tax policy doesn't matter. I guess they could add up all the payrolls of America, and whatever they added up to, that's how much money the federal government would bring in if the tax rate was 100%. But that would not happen. And frankly, the tax rate of collecting the $2.2 trillion is about all that we ought to be collecting out of this economy. For the 65 years after World War II, the government spent an average of about $1 out of 5 that the federal government, that the economy could create. Well, now we're spending $1 out of 4. And there's a big difference in a country where the federal government alone spends $1 out of 4 that the country can create in goods and services, as opposed to $1 out of 5. You're not going to get a lot more on the taxing side, so we have to make the reductions in spending. And then you're going to hear, well, we're just making these reductions out of 12 or 15% of the budget. Is that fair? Well, first of all, that's the only part of the budget that we can get to without significant legislative activity that should be the next thing on our agenda. Let's talk about the 60% of the budget that we normally don't even talk about, where if you meet the definition of the program, you get the money, and see if we can't figure out how to produce better results for fewer dollars. That's what everybody else in America has been thinking about for 20 years now. If you're still in business in America and you're competing in a global economy, you've been thinking, how do we get a better result for less money, not how do we spend more money. We need to be sure that the government is as good as the people it serves in that regard. And 12 or 15% of the budget, we're talking about reducing spending by $61 billion. That wouldn't begin to be nearly enough if you proportion it out. That's about 1/7 of the budget. If you multiply that by seven, you're still well over $1 trillion short of where you need to be. So we need to start by taking at least this much money out of that part of the budget and figure out how we can also make the government work better in the other 85% of the budget. Today is what it is. Today's a discussion to prove apparently that we can't do anything, that we can't do what the majority wants to do, we can't do what in the Senate wants to do, we can't do what the majority in the House wants to do. But let me tell you, what the majority in the House wants to do is a minimum entry level to solving this whole problem. And I'm going to vote for it today, and I urge my colleagues to vote for it as well, and I yield the floor.